Alright, this is a factoring review, and again, you've pretty much, if you've gotten this far, then you've either, if this is your first sheet, either you did a very good job on the quiz, which is great. We just have to get your factoring together, and if you've worked your way through all the other ones and you are pretty much on your last sheet, so again, keep it going so that we can get you ready for Friday and help you to do a good job. The main thing about factoring, which is why I'm even going over this, is because it may not be the major piece of this test, but it is the topic of the next test. And if you don't know how to factor by next week, or if you don't have at least an idea of how to factor by next week, then it's going to be a tough unit for you. So we need to make sure we at least look at this. So again, you're doing this because you made major mistakes on the factoring questions. Remember again that the first part is finding the GCF, and that if every term has a variable, that you can actually take off a variable. We also talked about the fact that whenever you take off a variable, you take the lowest amount, which makes sense because if you're talking about 6x to the 5th and 4x to the 7th, we can take off 5 x's. But if we add a plus 3 here, notice this has no x's, so we can't take off any x's. But if this had an x, then we could take off 1. So you take the lowest amount for the variables, but again, you have to find out what number actually goes. But after that, you just pretty much do the opposite of the distributive property, which is to divide the number and subtract. Think about distributive property and multiplication where we multiply and add. You just do the opposite. And again, I think you can do it. You just have to actually practice it and slow down and stop rushing through things, and everything will work out. Either way, 24 and 27, if you want the greatest number for that, again, it's not even. Check 3. 3 goes into 24, 3 goes into 27. That works. So that's what we're going to take off. And again, take the lowest amount. That has 1 x, that has 0 x's, which means we can take off 0 x's because that doesn't have anything. And again, from there, once you have the GCF, now you have to rewrite all the information. So 24 divided by 3 is 8. The x did not change because I didn't touch it. Keep the sign the same, please. And 27 divided by 3 is 9. And you should be able to check this by saying 3 times 8 is 24, 3 times 9 is 27. That has to be my answer. It is just the opposite of the distributive property, and all you're doing is taking off your GCF and then factoring it out. Some of you simply wrote the GCF. That's really way below the level of what you should be able to do, which means anytime you see it, just assume you're going to factor. And again, if it's on one of those Math Excel assignments, just bring it over to me and I'll tell you that you need to just put the GCF. But if I were you, from here on out, I would just do the complete factorization. Don't just write 3 and then circle it and say, hey, the biggest number is 3. Math doesn't care about that number. It cares about whether what makes it equivalent to itself. Here, 12 and 18, I think there's a number higher than 2. For example, let's see, for 12, thinking about the numbers that go into 12, if you're stuck, just make a factor tree for it. 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. 12 doesn't work in 18, 9 doesn't, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. I don't know what I'm saying. But 6 does go into 18, which means that 6 is your biggest number. But notice, again, after you find your biggest number, this has 2 x's, that has 1. The lowest amount is 1, so we can take off 1 x. And again, when you do this, 12 divided by 6 turns into 2. You had 2 x's, but you took 1 off. You have to count that way. And so you're left with 1. Copy the sign. 18 divided by 6 is 3. I had 1 x, but I took it off. I'm left with no x's anymore. And that is your stopping point. Again, a quick check. 6 times 2 is 12. And there are 2 x's. 6 times 3 is 18. And there is 1 x. Which means it's just the opposite of the distributive property. It's really frustrating for all the teachers whenever kids miss this question, because in all honesty, the only reason you can miss it is if you don't take the time to check, which pretty much means that those students don't want to be successful in this stuff. And that is frustrating because it's easy enough that you can do. It's kind of like cleaning your room or washing the dishes. The mistakes that you make are just from being lazy. So it's hard to get somebody to do it right. And I can't force you to do it right, but I can just say that there's no reason why you should not be missing that. Add an x to this last piece. I didn't recognize that it was there, but yeah, please add an x to this 8, because otherwise it's a whole different type of question. Anyway, looking at this, the biggest number for 10, 12, and 8, I believe it's because they're all even, is 2. But if you look to see what you can take off, 3 x's, 2 x's, and 1 x, the lowest amount is 1 x. Open your parentheses. 10 divided by 2 is 5. I had 3 X's, I took 1 off, I have 2. Notice how slow I'm going through it, but you also notice that I don't typically miss my questions. Then you copy the sign, and then 12 divided by 2 is 6. And then I had 2 X's, but I took 1 off, I have 1 left. I copy the sign, 8 divided by 2 is 4. I had 1 X, I took it off, I close my parentheses. It's very simple. Pretty much this whole unit is pretty simple. You just have to stop rushing through. So if you take a moment to go ahead and work through these questions, again, be sure to think carefully for your GCF. Otherwise, you're going to miss it. And again, when you hand it in, I will tell you which ones you missed. I won't tell you what you did wrong, but I'll tell you which ones you missed for you to go back and try to figure out what's going on. So other than that, like I said, get this done, and once you get this finished, then we should be ready to move on to get ready for the test. Good luck.